The LA Rams begin their chase toward Super Bowl 60 this Sunday, September 7th, against a loaded Texans team. Now, I'll give my thoughts on some players to watch, some key matchups, and how I see the game ending up going. Now, of course, week one is always a hard game to predict because you just haven't seen any games yet. You don't really see any of the team's identities from the Rams or the Texans or any team across the NFL. And so you're just kind of trying to make predictions based on what you saw last season on top of where the teams are heading this season. So I need your help. Definitely let me know how you guys think this game is going to go down in the comments below, whether you're a Rams fan, Texans fan, NFL fan. I want to know your thoughts. Now, if you take a closer look into what the Rams offense was last year, they were definitely a very streaky and inconsistent offense. If they caught fire, they were a great offense, but I feel like most of the year we were just trying to find our rhythm and our groove, and oddly enough, it was more of a defensive team for a lot of the year than it was an offensive team. Now, a lot of that inconsistency and struggle on the offense did come from the injuries because we suffered a lot of injuries on the offensive line and just kind of shook up the lineup a little bit. And then we even lost some players in the skill position like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua for some extended period of time. We were having to call on some depth there, and just overall, it felt like we never really got rolling on offense. And then when Cooper Kupp came back, it didn't really look like he was fully himself. And so this offense just never got into a groove. I think the 2025 Rams offense has reason to be explosive and very dynamic for a lot of different reasons. But obviously a big highlight to this Rams offense is Davante Adams, who I have a very bold prediction that he's going to be the Rams wide receiver 1 this season, as long as everybody stays healthy. I think he's going to lead the team in yards and in touchdowns. I just think he's going to pop off this year in the Sean McVay offense. So that gives you reason to be excited, but also just the depth of this team and the different types of skill sets that you have across the roster from wide receiver to tight end and how deep we are at those different positions. The Rams can really mix in a lot of different kind of personnel, whether you go 11, 11.5, 12, 22. They can really adapt and do a bunch of different things, and they have a lot of different kinds of talents on this roster that should injuries happen, you are still pretty set. It may limit how much you can change personnel from time to time, but you still have a lot of depth on this team. And the cool thing about this 2025 Rams offense is they can really lean into the run or the pass too. I think they can do both of them equally well. And so depending on the matchup, you can kind of morph your game plan into whatever you want. So I'm very high on this LA Rams offense, and going up against this Houston defense is going to be an interesting task. Now, the Texans defense is very young and fiery and has a lot of stars all across the board. I mean, just going off the list here, you got Derek Stingley, Kamari Lassiter, Jalen Petrie, Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson Jr., and that's just to name a few of them. They've got just stars all across the board, and a lot of guys that they've really put a lot of stock into and developed themselves. Now, on top of that, they have a very good head coach in DeMeco Ryans, who makes this whole defense go, makes them very versatile, gives a lot of different kinds of looks. He's just a very good defensive-minded head coach. Now, obviously, us Rams fans know quite a bit about DeMeco Ryans, just being in the division with him when he was on the 49ers. He always had a great game plan against the Rams whenever we played, and I have a lot of respect for what he is as a coach. Now, when you take a look at the stats for the Texans defense last year, just to give a bit of a backdrop on what they did, their overall defense ranked 6th in the NFL. They were 6th versus the run, 11th versus the pass, and they were the 14th scoring defense. So obviously they were just very good across the board. I think their weakest point from what I was finding was they were 27th in the red zone. So that's going to be really interesting to see how the Rams can take advantage of that if that problem continues into this year, especially with adding a guy like Davante Adams, who is a red zone nightmare, and Terrence Ferguson, who expects to be kind of a red zone nightmare. But really, the red zone is the only spot that I could find to see like kind of a weakness in this defense. Their entire defense just seems to flow very smoothly and just works together as one. And their pass rush paired with the guys in the back end just seem to work so well together. I mean, when you got great cornerbacks and a great pass rush together, it's very rare that that's going to go wrong for you, especially when you have a great defensive guy in DeMeco Ryans leading the way. I think the focus for this game for the Rams offense will not be about trying to stretch the field and take deep shots left and right. I just think this Texans defense is too disciplined, but also just too loaded, especially on the defensive line, to be able to sit back there, count on your guy like the left tackle, especially coming off of those blood clots, and Matthew Stafford just getting back in after that back injury. I just don't think it's smart to be leaning on a deep passing kind of offense for this week as much as McVay may want to. I think we're going to see a lot more quick passing, and we're going to see some screens. We're going to see misdirection, a lot of the classic McVay things. I think we're going to run the ball at a high rate, and I think we'll sprinkle in those deep shots. It's not like we're not going to take any of them. I just think they're going to be a little bit more calculated in when we're going to stretch the field when you're playing a defense like this. I think it would be smart to really lean into the run game, use a lot of the 12 personnel with the depth that we have at tight end, lean into Kyron, lean into Blake Corum, just try to tire out this defense a little bit before we start opening up the passing game. I think we're going to start doing that, but McVay just loves to pass the football, and with his new toy in Devontae Adams, I think he's going to get away from the run a little bit more than Rams fans may want. But I think you're just going to have to lean away from doing some long developing plays and some deep passes every single play in this kind of game when you're playing this kind of defense, and play it a little bit more smart, get the running backs involved, wear them out a little bit, mix in those misdirections and those quick passes, and utilize the personnel that you do have. Now let's get into some key matchups for this Rams-Texans game. So I honestly love the LA Rams wide receivers for the season, especially highlighted by Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. But just as an NFL fan, I'm also a huge fan of this Texans secondary. I really like Derek Stingley Jr., I love Kamari Lassiter, and even Jalen Petrie, who can move all around for this defense. I think that matchup of Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams versus those cornerbacks and those DBs in the Texans secondary is going to be very fascinating to watch, because both of them are extremely talented. It's just going to be so cool to see the chess match between both teams. I think both the Rams wide receiver group and the Texans secondary are going to have their wins and their losses, and that's what's going to be so interesting about it. I think that we're just going to see a lot of back and forth between both sides. Now, another matchup that I'm very curious to see how it plays out is AJ Jackson, our left tackle, versus Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson Jr. Obviously, these are two premier pass rushers in the NFL, and that's already going to be a great matchup in general, but also take into account the fact that AJ Jackson missed basically the entire Rams camp with those blood clots. He was working on the side, but wasn't doing any 11-on-11 or team things until really this game week. It's really been this game week that AJ Jackson is being worked back into team drills and actually playing with contact. And so seeing how he's going to match up against these two premier edge rushers, coming off those blood clots, coming off of not really having a bunch of live reps built up throughout the summer, that's going to be a very interesting thing to watch, especially considering Matthew Stafford is coming off of his back injury that he had. He's going to be good to go to play, but like, you don't want the blind side of Matthew Stafford to be unreliable or unprotected, or AJ Jackson to go down. I think that's going to be a very key matchup to watch. And a bonus matchup that I'm very excited to watch is Azeez Al-Shaair going up against Kyren Williams. This is a very fascinating matchup for me to watch, just because Kyren Williams and Azeez Al-Shaair play very similarly, in my opinion, just on different sides of the ball, but they're both aggressive. They both love contact. They're both very scrappy kind of players. It's just kind of an infectious energy that both of them play with, and to see that matchup is going to be very interesting to see who ends up winning, who ends up prevailing, and how that ends up going. Obviously, Al-Shaair came from the San Francisco 49ers, but he actually never matched up against Kyren Williams with the Rams, because his last season that he spent with the 49ers was that 2022 season where Kyren really wasn't the starting back. He went down early, and he really just didn't get much playing time. Now, the Rams defense last year did start pretty slow. This was kind of a combination of having a new defensive coordinator, trying to figure out life after Aaron Donald retired, and also a bunch of young guys like Braden Fisk and Jared Verse, Omar Spates, among others, were kind of getting their feet wet into the NFL. You saw that transition period at the start of the year. You saw some pretty ugly games, but as the year went on, especially in the back half of the season and into the playoffs, this team really grew into their identity. We started seeing players being used for what they were best at, and we were catching fire at the end of the year. Now, our biggest weakness on defense, despite how good they looked, was obviously the run defense, and we really saw this come into play against Philadelphia, both of those games, just seeing some long runs and some explosives. Overall, the run defense wasn't horrible against every team, but that's really where you saw the weakness kind of be exploited. Now, the Rams responded to this with adding Poona Ford, who came from the Chargers. He's supposed to be a big guy to help in the run defense, and he's been balling out in camp, especially against the run, and has been helping to plug those holes a little bit better than what we had last year. And on top of that, we brought in Nate Landman from Atlanta, and he is a good run-stopping linebacker. We saw this a lot in the training camp. He's been balling out there, even named a team captain just after being added this year, which was very impressive. So on paper, the Rams defense should be a lot better at stopping the run with those two additions, along with just the progression of Chris Shula in his second year and all these other guys getting an extra year of an experience. And just to see how all that plays out against the Texans is going to be vital. Now, speaking of running backs for the Houston Texans, Joe Mixon is actually going to miss this game due to injury. And a lot of Rams fans I'm seeing thinking that this is going to be a lot easier without him there. And while he's a pivotal piece, I think you guys need to remember Nick Chubb is actually on this team, hasn't played a snap for them yet. This will be his opportunity alongside Dameon Pierce to lead the running game for the Texans. one that they should be relying on a lot this game. And so I think this is going to be a good test for the Rams to be like, okay, you brought in Poona Ford, you brought in Nate Landman, and you expect the run defense to take a step this year. This is going to be a huge test for them. Now, the Texans offense last year did dip a lot in production, and a lot of people are blaming us on CJ Stroud, saying he's a bust, that he's not fit for the NFL. I think that's crazy, especially after you saw what he did in his first year. A lot of it was due to the offensive line injuries that they suffered, and even just injuries in general, like to the wide receiver core. Everybody was going down. Stroud did not have a ton of time to throw the football, and for any quarterback, that's just not a great situation to put him in. Alongside that, former offensive coordinator for the Texans, Bobby Slowick, did end up getting fired after just not having a great year. Play calling wise for the Houston Texans, and they bring in a familiar face for Rams fans, Nick Caley, who was our tight ends coach and passing game coordinator just a couple years ago. That's going to be interesting to see what he does and his little wrinkle that he adds to this Texans offense. Again, I want to harp on the fact that I don't think CJ Stroud is a bust. I think it was more a product of the system and the situation that was going on around him last year. It's just a lot of quarterbacks would struggle with that. Now, I'm very interested to see what former Rams coach Nick Caley draws up for this Houston offense. Now, when you're going up against a pass rush like the Rams, who is young, fierce, and hungry and all work together as one very well, that's always going to be a big challenge for any team. But especially when you take a look at the offensive line for the Texans this year, they lost their best guy in Laramie Tunsil in a trade to the Commanders. They spent a second-round pick on Ariante Ursary in this draft, brought in Cam Robinson, who the Rams actually destroyed every time that they played him last year, and they brought in a guy who's always just been a decent veteran in Laken Tomlinson. So you're losing three guys on the offensive line, and the offensive line already was struggling. So just based on that basic logic going against this pass rush, it's going to be interesting to see what Nick Caley has drawn up for this offense, because obviously they're not going to just go in blinded and just letting anything happen. I think they're going to have a plan for it, so it's going to be interesting to see what that is. I believe the Texans are going to rely on the screen game, on running the ball, quick passes, moving the pocket, all those kinds of things, just to kind of tire out the pass rush and try to neutralize it as best they can. I really think that they're going to try to go into a weak spot for the Rams of what it was last year, and the Rams obviously not having a great run defense last year. I think they're going to really try to test that in this game and see if we really did make improvements in the run defense. Texans wide receiver core is very stacked when you look at it. Obviously, they don't have Tank Dell, who's still coming back from an injury, but Nico Collins, very underrated wide receiver one guy. They brought in Jaden Higgins, who is a rookie. They have Christian Kirk, Jalen Noel, Xavier Hutchinson. I think that these wide receivers are very good, paired with Dalton Schultz, who I think is a very adequate tight end, who is actually kind of under the radar a little bit. So the Rams are definitely going to have their hands full when it comes to the weapons that they're going to have to try to defend. I really do like the weapons that the Texans have here that we are going to be facing, but I also like our secondary, and I think our secondary is a little bit underrated just amongst Rams fans, but also the NFL fan bases. And so just seeing how they're going to react against a loaded wide receiver and tight end roster like this, I think that's going to be something interesting to watch. Now, some key matchups for the Rams defense versus the Texans offense for me personally, definitely going to be Akella Witherspoon and Emmanuel Forbes Jr. versus Nico Collins in this weapon group for the Houston Texans. We heard great things out of camp out of Emmanuel Forbes and all the strides he's taken. Obviously, we added him last year, didn't really get to see much of him, but apparently there's been massive growth all throughout camp, and he's supposed to be a starter alongside Akella Witherspoon. Witherspoon is playing with a different kind of confidence, according to DeMarco Farr, and so it's going to be really interesting to see how these cornerbacks match up against this very talented weapon group for the Houston Texans. And naturally, I'm also very curious to see how Nate Landman and Poona Ford do, our two new additions for the run defense, because I do think that the Texans are going to lean into that run game to try to neutralize the Rams pass rush, and going up against a guy like Nick Chubb and Dameon Pierce, those are physical runners, and it's going to be a big test for our run defense. And just as an overall group, I'm excited to see this LA Rams pass rush with how much they were catching fire at the end of last season, to see them go up against what I think is going to be a very vulnerable offensive line, an offense who is still going to be figuring it out a little bit. I think that they're going to be licking their chops in this matchup. Now, both these teams have loaded rosters and great coaches. I think it's going to be very competitive, and the score prediction I have doesn't match how I see the game going from a competitive standpoint. I see the Rams winning 24-14 in the end. Again, it's hard to predict week one, but I think that it's going to start out a little bit more competitive, a lot closer, and then second half the Rams are going to kind of take the cake. I think the Texans have a few things to be figuring out early on in week 1. I think that their season is going to get better as the year goes on, but I think I like where we are getting him here in week 1 while they're kind of figuring out the offensive line, while they're trying to get back into their identity, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I think they're just outmatched when it comes to the Rams pass rush against CJ Stroud and that offensive line who was struggling last year. Again, 24-14 doesn't make it sound like I think it's going to be very close. I really do. I just think that second half is really going to be where things begin to fall apart for the Texans. And again, predictions are hard. It's week 1, so definitely let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Those are my thoughts. If you could drop a like on this video and subscribe if you like Rams content, that would help me out a lot to try to grow the channel. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Horns up and God bless.